This rifle was never meant for elite soldiers. It was built for peasants, for barely trained conscripts with muddy boots and calloused hands. It was cheap to make, easy to use, hard to break, and it cost less than a pair of army boots. You could drag it through sand, drop it in a rice paddy, freeze it in a mountain pass, and it would still fire when polished Western rifles started to choke. On paper, this was the opposite of a special forces weapon. But a few decades later, the men who trusted it the most weren't the boys with wool coats anymore. They were Spetsnaz teams kicking in palace doors at night, Israeli commandos slipping behind enemy lines, guerrilla commanders ambushing convoys on mountain roads. All of them had access to better-looking rifles. All of them could have chosen something more modern. Yet they kept choosing this. So, how did the AK-47 go from peasant rifle to Special Forces icon? That's the story we're telling today. The story starts in the late 1940s, in a ruined Soviet Union that had just survived the biggest land war in history. Mikhail Kalashnikov didn't design his rifle for elite professionals. He designed it for the average Red Army conscript, barely literate, poorly trained, exhausted before he even reached the front. The Red Army didn't need a precision instrument. It needed a hammer. Soviet leaders imagined human waves of infantry moving through snow and mud, each man carrying a rifle that simply could not quit. The AK was born with loose tolerances so dirt and ice had room to move, simple controls that a farm boy could learn in a single afternoon, and a mechanism that kept working even when nobody had time or oil to maintain it. On parade squares and training ranges, this looked crude. Compared to sleek Western rifles, the AK was ugly, heavy, and only roughly accurate. But in real combat, under real conditions, a pattern emerged. Other rifles complained, and the AK just did its job. That philosophy was meant for millions of ordinary soldiers. It accidentally created the perfect weapon for the few who operated where failure was not an option. The first glimpse of that comes on a winter night in 1979 in Kabul, Afghanistan. The Taj Beg Palace sits above the city, a royal residence turned fortress. Inside, President Hafizullah Amin, guarded by hundreds of men, heavy weapons, and layers of checkpoints. Outside, in the cold, a small group of Soviet special operators waits in trucks and armored vehicles. They belong to Alpha Group and Zenith Group, elite KGB and GRU formations the world will later know simply as Spetsnaz. Their mission has a code name, Operation Storm 333. The objective is brutal in its simplicity: storm the palace, eliminate Amin, and decapitate the Afghan government before it can break away from Moscow. These men can request almost any weapon in the Soviet inventory. They arrive with AK pattern rifles. Most carry the AK-74, the newer 5.45mm variant with a folding stock that fits better in cramped vehicles and narrow doorways. Some operators from the Muslim Battalion, a specialized unit recruited from Soviet Central Asia to blend in with the local population, carry suppressed AKS-74Us, the ultra-compact Krinkov variant barely longer than a submachine gun. But underneath the modifications, it's the same rugged action built for farm boys on the Western Front. At approximately 7:30 p.m., the assault begins. KGB Alpha Group operators, dressed in Afghan army uniforms to create confusion, lead the charge in BTR-60 armored personnel carriers. They're supposed to bluff their way through the outer checkpoints, then hit the palace before anyone realizes what's happening. The deception works for about 90 seconds. Then, someone inside recognizes the faces don't match the uniforms and the entire palace erupts. Machine gun nests hidden in the palace's decorative towers open up. Palace guards fire from windows, balconies, inner courtyards. The plan falls apart almost immediately. Instead of a swift surgical strike, it becomes a brutal room-to-room battle. Alpha Group operators sprint through narrow corridors, smoke and dust filling their lungs, flashbangs and grenades bouncing off marble floors. In this chaos, you don't have time to baby your weapon. You shoulder it, fire, drag it along walls and door frames, drop it, pick it up, fire again. The AK shrugs and keeps going. Colonel Grigory Boyarinov, commanding the assault, leads a team up the main staircase toward Armin's private quarters. His AK-74 takes multiple hits, rounds striking the metal receiver, one shot cracking the wooden handguard, but the rifle keeps cycling. Boyarinov himself doesn't survive the night, cut down by palace guard fire on the second floor, but the weapon in his hands fires its last magazine before he falls. Other operators describe magazines slammed in at awkward angles, rifles caked with plaster dust and blood, yet still cycling, ejecting, and feeding. One Alpha Group member later recounts how his AK-74U took a ricochet to the gas tube that bent the metal noticeably to the left. He fired another 100 rounds through it that night, without a single stoppage. By the end of the assault, dozens lie dead on both sides, but Armin is dead, killed by Spetsnaz fire in a ground-floor bar where he'd taken refuge, and the palace is under Soviet control. Storm 333 goes down in Cold War history as one of the most daring special operations ever executed. The men who pulled it off did not carry precision Western designs. They carried the same peasant rifle issued to line infantry, tuned and modified, but fundamentally unchanged. The operation sends a quiet message across the special operations world. This crude rifle is perfectly suited to the ugliest kinds of missions. On the other side of the Middle East, a different elite unit reaches the same conclusion, from the opposite direction. October 1973, the Yom Kippur War. Israel is caught by surprise as Egypt and Syria launch coordinated attacks. Israeli armor and infantry rush to plug gaps along the Suez Canal and the Golan Heights. In the shadows behind the front lines, Sayeret Matkal, Israel's most secretive special forces unit, the one that answers directly to military intelligence, starts to move. Their job is deep reconnaissance, targeted raids, and holding critical positions long enough for regular units to arrive. Israeli infantry carry Western-designed rifles, FNFALs in 7.62 NATO, the new Israeli-designed Galil that's basically an improved AK in Western caliber, and American M16. Sayeret Matkal knows them well. They train with them constantly, but once they're across the lines, operating in enemy territory, something changes. They start picking up AK-47s and the Egyptian-made Missa copies, along with Chinese Type 56 variants the Syrians use. At first, it's out of necessity. Their own supply lines are shaky, ammo is limited. The battlefield is littered with 7.62 magazines from knocked-out Egyptian and Syrian positions. When you're cut off, you don't argue with logistics, you adapt. But very quickly, the switch becomes a choice. During operations on the Golan Heights, Sayeret Matkal teams infiltrate Syrian positions to gather intelligence on tank concentrations and artillery emplacements. They move at night, sometimes spending days behind Syrian lines, living in wadis and abandoned buildings. Israeli operators notice that the Kalash they've captured runs without complaint in the volcanic dust that covers the Golan, the kind of fine, abrasive grit that gets into every crevice and turns lubricated actions into grinding metal. They can reload with enemy magazines pulled from dead soldiers or abandoned foxholes. They can scavenge parts from any knocked-out Arab position. In the chaos of close-quarter firefights, the AK is more than accurate enough. For some missions, there's another advantage that becomes doctrine: sound and silhouette. In the dark, on a noisy front where artillery and small arms fire echo across the hills constantly, an AK's distinctive bark sounds like just another Arab rifle. A Syrian patrol hears gunfire and assumes it's their own side, firing at shadows or conducting a negligent discharge. A Sayeret Matkal team can engage, break contact, melt back into the night, and sow confusion instead of triggering immediate pursuit. One documented operation has a 4-man team ambushing a Syrian supply truck on a mountain road, eliminating the guards with captured AKMs, then simply walking away as Syrian reinforcements arrive and start shooting at each other in the darkness, convinced they're under attack from multiple directions. By the end of the war, Israeli special forces don't just tolerate AKs. They respect them. Some units keep captured AKs in their armories long after 1973, not as trophies, but as practical tools for missions where deniability, reliability, and ammo commonality matter more than national pride. The pattern repeats: elite soldiers with access to top-tier Western rifles reach for the peasant gun when things get truly ugly. If there's one battlefield where the AK's transformation into an icon becomes irreversible, it's Afghanistan in the 1980s. Not on the Soviet side this time, but in the hands of the people fighting them. In the Panjshir Valley, a young commander named Ahmad Shah Massoud leads one of the most effective guerrilla forces of the war. Massoud's men are not random villagers with guns. Over time, he builds a corps of seasoned fighters, trained in small unit tactics, ambush doctrine, and coordinated operations across mountain passes. He sets up training camps deep in the valley where new recruits spend weeks learning fire discipline, movement under fire, and how to strip and reassemble their weapons blindfolded. Western reporters will later call him the Lion of Panjshir. The Soviets call him a nightmare. His core weapon is the AK-47, specifically the AKM variant that's lighter and more refined than the original milled receiver model, along with Chinese Type 56 rifles that flow through Pakistan by the tens of thousands. Through ISI networks and black markets, crates of Western rifles trickle into Afghanistan. Belgian FNFALs in 7.62 NATO, American M16A1s, and German G3s. On paper, many of these are better rifles, flatter trajectories, better ergonomics, and higher accuracy at range. But Massoud evaluates them and gives his verdict with his actions. His elite ambush teams almost always carry AKs. The reason becomes clear in the way they fight. Ambushes along the Salang Pass, the critical highway linking Kabul to the Soviet border, show how this looks in practice. A small group of fighters moves into position at night, climbing for hours through loose scree and snow to reach overwatch points above the road. They dig in among the rocks, cover their rifles with cloth to conceal the metal's shine, and wait. Snow, dust, and freezing wind batter them while they wait. No cleaning kits, no armorers, no spare rifles. Sometimes they wait for days, eating cold rice and dried meat, watching Soviet convoys pass below until the right target appears. A fuel convoy, or a transport carrying ammunition and supplies, or ideally a column with officers' vehicles identifiable by their antennas and markings. When the target convoy finally appears, trucks, fuel tankers, maybe a BTR-60 armored personnel carrier or two, they have one chance to hit hard and disappear before Soviet helicopter gunships arrive. The first RPG-7 rockets slam into the front and rear vehicles, trapping the column on the narrow mountain road with cliffs on one side and a drop on the other. Then the AKs open up from multiple angles, short, violent bursts directed at drivers, officers, and fuel trucks. In those moments, a malfunction isn't an inconvenience. It's death. The ambush has to succeed in under 3 minutes before Soviet QRF teams can organize a response. Massoud's fighters are intimately familiar with the AK's quirks and strengths. They know the weapon tends to shoot high at range, so they aim low. They know the safety lever is loud when you flip it, so they move it slowly during the stalk and keep the rifle on semi-auto, trusting their fire discipline over the selector switch. They know the AKM's stamped receiver will dent if you use it as a hammer, but it'll still fire with a dent. They know you can run the rifle filthy for weeks, then pour motor oil into the action and it'll smooth out again. After the ambush, when the Soviets counterattack with everything they have, attack helicopters, armored vehicles, infantry rappelling from Mi-8 transports, Massoud's men break contact according to rehearsed plans. They slide down ravines, scramble along goat paths, rifles banging against rocks, magazines dragging through mud and snow. Sometimes they low-crawl for hundreds of meters while Hind gunships work over the hillside with rockets and 12.7mm cannons. The AKs take abuse that would kill most rifles. Impacts against stone, immersion in freezing streams during crossings, buried in dirt when they have to play dead while Soviet troops sweep past. They regroup in a different valley, shake the dust off, function-check their weapons with a quick press of the bolt and a peek into the chamber, and prepare for the next ambush. The weapon that lets them fight this way, month after month, year after year, is not a fragile precision rifle. It's the same peasant gun, built for conscripts, now in the hands of some of the most effective guerrilla fighters of the Cold War. Soviet after-action reports from the Panjshir campaigns repeatedly note the enemy's ability to maintain sustained operations despite their crude equipment, not understanding that the equipment's crudeness is exactly what makes sustained operations possible. Meanwhile, Soviet Spetsnaz units in Afghanistan are learning the same lesson from the opposite side of the war. The 15th Spetsnaz Brigade, based in Chirchik but operating throughout Afghanistan, conducts long-range reconnaissance and direct action missions that regular motor rifle units can't handle. Tasked with hunting Mujahideen supply caravans, raiding training camps, and interdicting smuggling routes along the Pakistani and Iranian borders, they operate in tiny teams, sometimes just 6 to 8 men, hundreds of kilometers from major bases. They patrol for days or weeks with everything on their backs: food, water, medical gear, radios, and their AKs. Here, the rifle isn't a disposable mass-issue weapon. It's a lifeline. A typical Spetsnaz operation along the Durand Line illustrates why they trust the AK. A team infiltrates into Pakistani border territory, technically a violation of sovereignty, but a tactical necessity, to interdict a confirmed weapons shipment moving toward Massoud's forces. They move at night through terrain that ranges from high desert to pine forest, maintaining radio silence, navigating by stars and landmarks memorized from aerial photos. Their AK-74s, the 5.45mm variant that's replaced the older 7.62mm models in frontline Spetsnaz units, have seen months of hard use. The folding stocks are loose from wear. The Bakelite magazines are cracked but still functional. The rifles themselves are coated in dust so fine it looks like grey frost. On the third night, they locate the caravan, a dozen pack mules, 8 to 10 armed escorts, moving single file along a goat path. The team sets up an L-shaped ambush, 6 men forming the long side of the L along the path, 2 men forming the short side to catch anyone who runs. They lie still for an hour as the caravan approaches, breath frosting in front of them in the thin mountain air at 3,000 meters elevation, rifles resting on cold rock. The cold is so intense it hurts to breathe, and metal that touches exposed skin will freeze to it instantly. The AK-74s are ice cold to the touch, but they don't seize up like some weapons do in extreme cold. When the caravan enters the kill zone, the team leader initiates the ambush with a 3-round burst. The rest of the team fires in sequence, not a wild fusillade but controlled bursts, each man engaging his assigned target. The escorts return fire. They're experienced fighters, not amateurs, and for 45 seconds, the mountain path becomes a furious close-range firefight. One Spetsnaz operator takes a round through his load-bearing vest that bruises his ribs but doesn't penetrate. His AK-74 takes 2 hits. One round strikes the magazine, cracking it lengthwise but not splitting it completely, and another hits the front sight post, bending it. He drops the damaged magazine, reloads, and keeps firing. The bent front sight throws his point of aim off by about 30 centimeters at 50 meters, but at this range he can compensate instinctively. The ambush succeeds. The team secures the weapons, a mix of Chinese Type 56, some American M16A1s still in Cosmoline, and ammunition that includes 7.62, 5.56 NATO, and even some 7.62 by 54R for Dragunov rifles. They rig demolitions to destroy what they can't carry, then exfiltrate before Pakistani border guards or Mujahideen reinforcements arrive. The entire patrol covers 180 kilometers on foot over 8 days. The rifles that make this possible aren't pampered competition guns. They're AK-74s that have been dropped, submerged, frozen, fired thousands of times, and never once cleaned beyond a quick wipe down with whatever cloth is available. This kind of operation happens hundreds of times throughout the Soviet-Afghan War. The rifle becomes part of the identity of the men who carry it. Years of such operations burn in an image that spreads through military communities worldwide. Small, highly trained groups, moving fast, hitting hard, with AKs in their hands. Western advisors working with the Mujahideen see the rifle's performance firsthand and carry those lessons home. CIA and British SAS trainers running weapons courses in the border camps quickly learn that the AK is the only rifle they can reliably issue to fighters who might not see a cleaning kit for 6 months. By the late 1980s, both Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 maintained stockpiles of AK variants for training and for sterile operations where carrying American weapons would compromise deniability. The First Chechen War from 1994 to 1996 showcases the rifle's dual identity. Russian special forces conduct urban combat operations in Grozny with modernized AK-47 rifles. Across the street, Chechen fighters defend with captured AKMs. Both sides trust the same platform because both sides know urban combat destroys equipment faster than any other environment. Modern variants pick up rails, suppressors, and folding stocks that transform the AK into something barely resembling the original. But the heart remains the same. Special forces choose it because it works in deserts, jungles, mountains, and cities where other rifles fail. They choose it because in territory where the AK is everywhere, you can resupply from your enemy. They choose it because the silhouette sends a message. This is someone operating on the edge. In the end, that's the paradox. The AK-47 was designed for the lowest common denominator, a rifle for millions of men who would get almost no training. But the very traits that made it perfect for them also made it perfect for the handful of units that could not afford to fail. On the worst day of a mission, when you're tired, cold, dirty, outnumbered, and almost out of time, you don't need a fragile masterpiece. You need a weapon that will fire one more magazine, and one more after that. That's how the AK-47 went from peasant rifle to Special Forces icon.